The first thing Flint Anderson noticed when he stepped into the classroom was the six-legged creature pacing at the front. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, its translucent skin pulsing with faint green light. The eyes were too many to count with a glance, and its limbs moved like overcooked noodles suspended by invisible strings. Every student sat in silent awe or thinly veiled terror. Flint, however, just lowered his backpack onto the floor, took his seat in the second row, and muttered, "Well, this'll be weird." Professor Sile was an exchange instructor from Drazul 8, part of a recent interstellar education program that paired Earthlings with alien minds for mutual learning. It was the third week of xenobiological foraging and adaptive scavenging, a course that sounded more like a survival show than a university elective. Flint had only signed up because the engineering lab had a 2-semester waitlist, and he needed science credits. Professor Sile's voice buzzed through the translator unit suspended above the chalkboard. Today's assignment: retrieve a living specimen of the Telvakian sugar glider beetle, native to this region's artificial biome. A hologram flickered to life beside the professor. It showed a pale, oblong insect with translucent wings and long, twitching legs. Its abdomen glowed faintly blue. Each of you will work independently. No teams, no drones, no off-world detectors or pheromone simulators, Sile said. You will use only what is available in nature and your own intellect. A ripple of groans passed through the room. Flint leaned forward slowly. "Are they dangerous?" he asked. The professor turned toward him. "Not to you, but they are exceedingly rare and fast. You have 48 Terran hours." The class ended without further ceremony. Students filed out muttering about wing traps, net arrays, and how last semester's group only had to sketch the beetle, not catch it. Flint wandered out behind them, his mind already ticking. He wasn't a biologist or a survivalist, but he did know a thing or two about field improvisation. His dad had been a park ranger, and Flint had spent summers building squirrel-proof bird feeders and raccoon deterrents. He found a quiet bench near the edge of the Arboretum dome and pulled out a notebook. "Sugar glider beetle," he said aloud, "drawn to sugar. Okay." He sketched a basic funnel trap, then scratched it out. These things were fast. Nets wouldn't work. He needed them to come to him and stay. He needed bait, real sugar, nothing synthetic. Most of the students would go high-tech because that's what they were used to, but the professor had said no tech. Flint figured sticking close to the insect's name might be the way to go. He closed his notebook and stood up. Time to go shopping. The campus greenhouse had a student-run produce section, and Flint, after a brief and awkward explanation, walked out with a bag of overripe fruit and a small container of cane sugar. He passed a few classmates in the hall who were busy arguing over net density and wing flutter frequency. Back at his dorm, he spread the fruit out on a tray near the small balcony, watching how quickly ants and smaller insects swarmed it. He crushed some of the fruit into a thick pulp, mixed in a few spoonfuls of sugar, and left it overnight. At dawn, Flint packed up the sticky mixture, a few tools, and a clear container with air holes drilled into the lid. The Arboretum dome opened at 6, and he was the first one in. The artificial biome simulated a tropical forest, thick with vines and buzzing with unfamiliar sounds. He found a quiet spot near a natural spring and paused. He pulled out a collapsible frame, lined it with mesh, and set the bait directly in the center. Then he stepped back and waited. 2 hours passed. Leaves rustled above him. Something scurried near his boot, but no beetle. Then, just as he considered moving the trap, he heard a faint, high-pitched fluttering. He turned slowly. A pale, oblong shape zipped above the trap, hovered, then dove down. It landed on the mesh, cautiously edging toward the bait. Flint held his breath. The beetle dipped its forelegs into the syrupy mix, then its whole body followed. Its wings stuck immediately. It buzzed in protest, but the sugar mixture was too thick. Flint approached slowly, lifted the edge of the trap's mesh, and gently slid the beetle into the container. He sealed the lid and exhaled hard. He started to turn when a voice behind him said, "What the hell is that?" Flint jumped. It was Margot, one of the top students in the class. She looked at the container in his hands with wide eyes. "That," Flint said, "is a Telvakian sugar glider beetle. You caught one already. How? She asked. He showed her the trap. Sugar bait, real fruit, nothing fancy. Just sticky enough to hold them once they land. Margot stared at him like he'd just taught fire to cavemen. You didn't use a sonic lure. Nope, no pheromone mist, just bananas and sugar. She leaned closer to the container. I spent 6 hours trying to rig a retractable net canopy. It collapsed on my own head, Flint shrugged. Sometimes simple works. As the sun climbed higher, Flint returned to the classroom building. Professor Sile was already there, cataloging specimens from other students. Most were empty. A few held unrelated insects. One held a rock. When Flint placed his container on the table, Sile blinked all 6 eyes at once. You succeeded. I did. You caught it alone, without assistance. Yep, Sile leaned closer. Explain your method. I figured it had sugar in the name for a reason. I made a bait mixture with fruit and cane sugar. The wings got stuck, that's how I caught it. Sile stood silently for a moment, then he turned to the rest of the class. Observe, this is what adaptation looks like, not complexity, not technology, but the application of fundamental principles. Flint didn't smile. He was too tired. His arms itched from mosquito bites and he had leaves in his shirt. But he felt something in his chest tighten, not pride exactly, but something close. Sile dismissed the class early. As Flint walked out, Margot caught up with him. Are you going to patent that or something? She asked. Pretty sure people have been baiting bugs with sugar since before we had indoor plumbing, he said. Well, still, she said. Nice job. Back in his dorm, Flint sat down, examined a welt on his forearm, and sighed. All this for one bug. He didn't notice the small, blue glowing insect that had hitched a ride on his backpack until it flitted across the room and landed on his desk. He stared at it. Then he grabbed a cup and trapped it gently underneath. It was going to be a long semester. Flint woke up to a throbbing ache behind his eyes and a soft, rustling sound from somewhere near the floor. He blinked against the early light filtering through the dorm window. The beetle. The one that had clung to his backpack, it was no longer under the cup. He slid off the bed, bare feet hitting the cold tile, and scanned the room. Something blue darted under the desk. Great, he muttered, crouching down. You're going to get me expelled for unauthorized specimen containment. He tipped the desk lamp sideways and spotted the beetle clinging to the inside of an open snack wrapper. Its wings were dry now, and it twitched slightly as if testing the air. Flint reached forward carefully and coaxed it into an empty granola bar box, which he closed with a tissue jammed into the opening. He looked at his arm. The welt had deepened overnight, swollen to the size of a bottle cap with a dark center that pulsed slightly. A faint tingling traced up his bicep. The campus health station was a 10-minute walk, but Flint took the back corridors to avoid running into anyone from class. He didn't want to explain why he was carrying a buzzing cardboard box covered in duct tape. Inside the medical wing, the receptionist was a pale-skinned Cathari whose eyelids moved sideways. She looked at the tissue-stuffed box, then at Flint's arm, and tapped a glyph on her screen. You'll want to see Dr. Havoc. Please sit. Do not open that. I wasn't planning to. 10 minutes later, he was ushered into a room that smelled faintly like boiling mushrooms. Dr. Havoc was a long-limbed being with a faint amber glow radiating from his joints. He wore a loose smock and a translator earpiece that blinked irregularly. You were stung, the doctor said, circling Flint's arm, but not by anything from this hemisphere. It was one of those beetles from the arboretum, Flint said, setting the taped box on the table. It hitched a ride. I think it was trying to find more sugar. You fed it. No, it fed itself after it escaped. Havoc made a sound like someone whistling into a bottle. Interesting. That species isn't known to ingest anything post-capture. Their energy stores shut down once they feed to full capacity. Well, this one didn't get the memo. Havoc gently pressed around the inflamed area. Does this sting feel warm, burning? Any dizziness? Only when I blink too hard. The doctor nodded slowly and walked to a console, typing with 4 fingers on each hand. The Telvakian glider beetle has a defense reflex. It secretes a hemolytic enzyme when startled. It's not meant for humans. Is this going to rot my arm off? Unlikely, Havoc said, but his tone wasn't wildly reassuring. Your system is reacting to the enzyme, likely causing localized inflammation and mild neurochemical misfiring. That sounds like something that belongs in a lawsuit. I'll administer a chelating agent, Havoc said, prepping an injector. You'll feel a cold rush followed by a mild metallic taste. That's normal. Flint flinched as the needle sank into his upper arm. Will I be able to finish the class? Depends. Can you still hold a container? I can hold sarcasm if that counts. Havoc's eyes blinked sequentially. Your immune system is adapting rapidly. Humans are extremely elastic. Your internal chemistry is frankly chaotic. I don't mean that as an insult. Thanks, I think. The doctor handed him a small inhaler. Use this twice daily for 40 hours. It'll suppress the irritant response. If your vision starts tunneling, come back immediately. What does tunneling mean? Like a headache? No, like your eyes begin to perceive only a narrow circle of reality and everything else collapses into darkness. Cool. So regular college stuff. Flint left with a dull ache in his shoulder and a slightly less frantic beetle box. The bug had stopped fluttering and seemed to be resting. He considered letting it go, but then remembered the professor's offhand comment, exceedingly rare. If this one was behaving differently, maybe it was more valuable. By early evening, he was back in the arboretum, this time without bait. He set the box down near the glider beetle's known habitat, opened it, and waited. He expected it to fly off. Instead, it crawled out slowly, paused on the lip of the box, and rotated its head toward him. It made a series of high-pitched chirps, almost rhythmic, and then skittered into the underbrush. Flint sat back against a moss-covered boulder and stared at the canopy above. The air smelled like citrus and wet bark. For a moment, he just listened. Behind him, someone cleared their throat. He turned and saw Jula, one of the other exchange students. Her skin shimmered in patches of violet and gold, and she wore a set of magnifying goggles pushed up on her forehead. She gestured at the open box. You released it. Wasn't mine to keep. That's not how most of us think, she said, sitting beside him. I heard you caught one without equipment. Guilty. She took a small scanner from her pouch and ran it over the moss. Most of us keep adding layers of tech. You just watched. That's not common. I'm not sure I knew what else to do. You adapted without overthinking. That's rare. Most species mine included tend to overcomplicate when faced with ambiguity. I didn't have time to overcomplicate. I had a deadline. Jula laughed, a chittering sound like pebbles clicking together. Maybe that's your species' secret. Deadlines. They force clarity. A faint rustle echoed from the trees. They both paused. Another beetle slightly darker than the one he'd released landed on a branch nearby. It didn't move, just watched. Jula raised her scanner again, but Flint held up his hand. No, let it be, she lowered it. You think they're observing now? I think they're smarter than we assumed. Jula looked at him, then back at the beetle. If they're communicating, we've been collecting them all wrong. Maybe they're not specimens, Flint said. Maybe they're scouts. Night fell gradually inside the dome, with the artificial sun dimming until the undergrowth glowed faintly from bioluminescent fungi. The two students sat in silence for a while, neither moving. Eventually, Jula stood. I'm submitting my report tomorrow. I'm not including a capture. You'll get marked down. I don't care. They're not ours to catch anymore. As she walked away, the beetle on the branch fluttered once and vanished into the dark. Flint stayed another 10 minutes, then stood and stretched. His arm still tingled, but the swelling had gone down. Back in his dorm, he wrote in his notebook not trap designs this time, but a series of notes about the beetle's movements, the chirping sequence, the way the second one had appeared after the first was released. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he had a feeling it would matter. And this time, he planned to watch a little longer before trying to catch anything at all. By the time Flint walked into the biology analysis wing 3 days later, his left arm looked almost normal again. The swelling had faded, and the tingling had stopped entirely the previous afternoon. He still had the odd pressure behind his eyes when he stood up too fast, but the campus clinic ran a full panel and cleared him with a distracted thumbs up and some kind of protein supplement that smelled like burnt algae. He had skipped 2 classes, but Professor Sile hadn't marked him absent. In fact, when Flint stepped into the lab, the professor was hunched over a shallow containment dish, all limbs unusually still. The dish contained a curled, iridescent carapace lying motionless on a padded substrate. "It expired this morning," Sile said without looking up. Flint set his notebook on the counter. "You had one in containment. It arrived yesterday from the research station on Grelta's belt. It was part of a behavioral study short-term observation only." Sile finally turned, blinking once. "You've been studying them further, haven't you?" "I've been watching them. Since I let the one go, I've seen more. They don't act like solitary insects. They're organized. They take turns landing. None of them go near the trap site anymore." Sile's mandibles clicked faintly. "That is not part of their documented behavior profile." "Well," Flint said, flipping his notebook open, "either the profile's outdated or we've been looking at it wrong." Sile gestured toward the main console. "Show me." Flint pulled up a series of short video clips he'd taken with his old handheld camera, the one with a cracked lens and no stabilizer. The footage was shaky but clear enough. A group of beetles hovered in a loose arc above the foliage, dipping one at a time toward a cluster of sweet-smelling flowers. They seemed to be taking turns. None of them landed if another was already feeding. Sile leaned closer. "Coordinated foraging. I thought maybe it was coincidence," Flint said, "so I tried placing 2 food sources at different distances. Same result. You observed this alone." I ran into a few students. Jula saw the pattern too. "She's submitting a non-capture report." Sile's upper limbs folded behind his back. "That will cost her academic standing. She said it was worth it." There was a quiet pause, then the professor turned away from the screen. "The data you've collected, do you intend to publish?" Flint rubbed the back of his neck. "I wasn't planning on it. I mean, I'm not even majoring in this." "That's irrelevant." "Is it though?" "I figured I'd just pass the class and go back to fixing broken water filters in the engineering lab." Sile tapped a control panel, and a soft hum filled the lab. The expired beetle's body was gently vacuum-sealed into a clear cylinder and labeled with a string of glyphs. "I've taught this course on 73 worlds," Sile said. "Each time students attempt to outmatch nature with tools, you are the first to alter the behavior of the subject species without direct intervention." "I didn't alter anything. I just didn't interfere." "Exactly," Flint shrugged. "I think they were already adapting. I just got out of the way long enough to notice." Sile tapped the table twice, and a small drawer slid open. Inside was a slim data chip and a folded sheet of official-looking parchment. "This is a field commendation for ecological insight. It includes a research credit transferable to your home institution." Flint stared at it. "You're giving me an award for not catching a bug." "I'm recognizing the capacity to observe without dominating." "That is a higher skill." He picked up the parchment, unfolded it, and blinked at the looping, elegant script. "This is in Krylanic. There is a translation embedded in the chip." Flint slipped them both into his backpack. "So, what happens to the rest of the class?" "They'll submit their reports. Most will fail to capture viable specimens. Some will fabricate results. A few will withdraw. And me, you've concluded your assignment, so I'm done. Unless you wish to continue studying the species." Flint hesitated. "Honestly, I think they'd prefer I didn't." Sile's facial plates shifted in what Flint had learned to interpret as approval. "Good." Outside, the artificial sun had just begun its simulated descent. Long shadows stretched across the quad. The Arboretum dome was still open, and for reasons he couldn't explain, Flint walked toward it one last time. The air was thicker than usual, saturated with the scent of damp leaves and something faintly citrusy. He stepped off the path and onto the mossy edge of the inner grove where he'd first released the beetle. He crouched down, not moving, and waited. After several minutes, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A single glider beetle drifted down, its wings catching the light. It hovered just above the spot where the bait had once been, then darted sideways, circling him once before settling on a low branch. It didn't move toward him. It just perched there, wings folded, silent. "All right," Flint said quietly. "No traps, no samples, just passing through." The beetle remained still. He stood, brushing dirt from his jeans, and turned back toward the path. A soft fluttering followed him for a few paces, then faded into the canopy behind him. Later that evening, Flint returned to his dorm and packed away his notebook. He didn't erase the footage or delete the files, but he didn't send them anywhere either. The next morning, he attended his engineering seminar. The lab instructor handed him a rusted filtration system and said, "Think you can make this drinkable by Friday?" Flint nodded. "Should be simple." The instructor raised an eyebrow. "You're smiling. It's just nice when something doesn't fly away halfway through," Flint said. The other students laughed. The class moved on. He didn't mention the beetles again. Not to anyone. Not because it was secret, but because he figured some things worked better when left uncollected. After all, they'd already collected enough.